learn more about that, go back to paleoecology and watch video number 5. This period saw a massive desert covering the interior of the supercontinent Pangaea. Exactly how hot and awful that was is clear from the image that shows the paleo temperatures here in degrees Celsius. And it's just that at the end of the Permian, based on climate simulations, we had annual temperatures that were reaching above 36 degrees, so really quite hot indeed. Because amniotes, this group of non-amphibian vertebrates, can hatch eggs outside of water, it allowed them to occupy new ecological niches. They were less tied to moist, damp environments. And this, coupled with the aridification in the Permian, led to further diversification within the amniotes in the Permian to major lineages that are still alive today. So in the Permian into the Triassic, we see splits in the amniote tree of life into mammal-like reptiles, things called synapsids that eventually went on to evolve into mammals, and a group called the diapsids. Modern-day representatives of the diapsids, just to rehearse what I said before, are the crocodiles, lizards, snakes, tuatara, turtles, and birds. Okay, so you've got this fundamental split in the vertebrate tree of life that occurs during this time period. At the end of the Permian, the PT extinction happened, and we learned about that in the extinction sessions. This was a really, really big event which hit life on land very, very severely. You can see an image on the left-hand side here of the state of life before and after that PT extinction. The PT extinction hit the diversity of terrestrial arthropods quite hard, including insects, and significantly changed the biogeography of the group. A number of land plants show significant decline, in particular within the seed ferns and within the gymnosperms. The vertebrates at the PT extinction are universally badly hit, and large herbivores kind of fared the worst in this big event. The images on the right-hand side are actually really interesting. They're from a recent paper that shows before, during, and after the PT extinction in a refugia in China. And the authors of this paper, which I've put on this slide, a citation on this slide here, make the claim that recovery from the PT was driven from and started within these refugia, these little packets where organisms survived and then went on to recolonize the Earth. And these refugia may have played a key role in the recovery from the Permo-Triassic extinction. Overall, we think that full recovery from the PT extinction took until the mid-Triassic period, and we see a lower diversity within tetrapods from this recovery period on land, or during this recovery period on land. So with the PT extinction, that brings us to the Mesozoic, the Triassic, Jurassic, and the Cretaceous periods. So let's look at what happens in the world of life on land during this time. So I would say over the course of the Mesozoic, things get increasingly familiar. Many groups of plants that are still alive and important today evolve, and major divisions in the vertebrate tree of life also occur during the Mesozoic. Essentially, as someone who works on Paleozoic land-based arthropods, I would say that the PT was the only extinction to ever really hit terrestrial arthropods that hard. And what we see is essentially a modern fauna, although there are some explosive diversifications within some of the terrestrial arthropods from the Mesozoic onwards. If I were to provide a really broad kind of generalized picture of what happens in the evolution of life on land, we can say that some of the earliest terrestrial reptiles that were around returned to the waters, as represented by this gratuitous shot from Jurassic World on the right-hand side here, in the Permian, but actually marine reptiles, which are tetrapods that have gone back to the oceans, diversified during the Mesozoic. On land, Triassic biotas are dry and highly seasonable. There's lots of changes between the climates of different seasons. We have lots of deserts, and this means that plants that need lots of water struggle. We see an increase in the diversity of groups such as the gymnosperms, and thick cuticle seed ferns are really quite successful during this time period. The first dinosaurs also evolved in the Triassic period, and from that point until their extinction at the KPG extinction, other than the birds, are the primary vertebrate contributors to the diversity of life on land. Because these are diapsids, we can then more generally say that the terrestrial macrofauna throughout the Mesozoic is driven by the diapsids, and diapsids increase in diversity during this time period largely, while synapsids, that's the group that includes ultimately mammals, aren't as diverse. They struggle along throughout the Mesozoic. Vertebrates also take to the sky multiple times in the Mesozoic period, and that happens for the first time in the Triassic, where we see the first flying vertebrates appear in the form of pterosaurs. As we move on from the Triassic into the Jurassic, we see a major extinction that marks the end of the Triassic period. We see an extinction of lots of diapsids, and these were the more diverse group at the time, so that's not unexpected, and many synapsids. Then, after this extinction, dinosaurs go on to exploit many of the newly available niches and diversify quite rapidly, kind of rising to ascendancy in these in these Mesozoic, especially in these Jurassic ecosystems, while synapsids cling on at relatively low diversity. The flying dinosaurs also appear during the Jurassic, and within this group, the origin of birds lies. Those the famous fossils you may have come across, such as Archaeopteryx, are Jurassic in age. If you're wondering when bats took to the wing, that was actually after the KPG extinction, so far later than the birds. So that's an important thing that happens during the Jurassic. And the supercontinent Pangaea really starts to break up during the Jurassic. And that means, as these paleo maps show of the Cretaceous, that the geography of Earth is getting increasingly familiar from the Jurassic into the Cretaceous world. Kind of by the early Cretaceous, it's looking a lot more familiar to us if we compare it to the world today. In terms of the plants that are around, conifers dominate tree diversity throughout the Jurassic and the Cretaceous. And essentially, what's happening is we're starting to approach quite modern looking ecosystems, ones that wouldn't look too alien to us in comparison to the Triassic and certainly the Paleozoic examples that I've given you already. But that doesn't mean that there weren't major events that were still happening. And I just wanted to finish by highlighting a couple of those. One important thing that happened later in the Mesozoic is the appearance of angiosperms or flowering plants. This is the last major group of plants to appear in the fossil record. We find the first flowers in rocks from the mid-Cretaceous, and there's a rapid diversification of flowering plants in the late Cretaceous, and it's so rapid that by the end of the Cretaceous period, angiosperms are the dominant lineage of plants. Something like 80% of 80% of plants are angiosperms by the KPG extinction. The radiation of the angiosperms in the Cretaceous led to profound changes in the composition of land-based plant communities, because this is a really, really species-rich group. And you can see this turnover, the angiosperms are shown here in red on this graph on the right-hand side. And their rise to predominance led to extinctions or marked declines in the diversity or abundance of many other groups of seed plants that had previously been important. Angiosperms have really quite impressive developmental and evolutionary plasticity, which may be one of the key reasons for their success. So maybe that is underlying this explosive diversification. But another key to the success of the angiosperms is the fact that they have co-evolved with insects. And to represent that, you can see this beautiful hymenopteron, probably a bee, I think, on the left-hand side here, covered in pollen. And insects are really, really good as pollinators because they allow the spread of genetic material over a wide area. Wind-pollinated plants can't achieve this to the same extent. And this this process of having insects as pollinators may have started with insects feeding on the plants, but fossil evidence is relatively patchy in terms of the exact mechanisms by which it took place. What we know now is that you actually get this high level of specialization between which insects pollinate which plants, leading to the explosive diversification, we think, of both groups. And so it's a really interesting and important dynamic in the later Mesozoic evolution of life on land that has continued through to today. So then the KPG extinction happened. If you want to learn more about that, you can watch the extinction videos, of course. And despite that, there have still been some really important and exciting changes in terms of what of evolutionary events on land. So a really good example of this is the rise of grass-dominated ecosystems, such as those that's shown on the left-hand side here. Those where grasses, ecosystems where grasses make up a significant fraction of the flora, are today globally widespread, and this has this really became the case since the KPG extinction. Nowadays, tropical savannas make up more than half of the land area of low latitudes, and grass-dominated ecosystems are abundant in North America and Central Asia. But this is actually quite recent. So I can tell you the earliest firm records of grass pollen are from the Paleocene of South America and Africa, somewhere between 60 and 55 million years ago. So before the KPG extinction, we didn't at all have these grass-dominated ecosystems that now are quite prevalent on the surface of the Earth. There is a traditional view that the rise of grasses and grasslands is closely tied to the observation that equids and other mammals, as shown in both the left and the right-hand side images here, developed what we call hypsodont, high-crowned teeth in the early Miocene from about 23 million years ago. These kind of really, really chunky teeth reflects the fact that things like horses and other members of this group that's broadly called the ungulates evolved to eat grass. Grass has lots of silica in its leaves, and that grinds away teeth. So it's another example where we see possibly the co-evolution of two groups. We see the evolution of grasses and the evolution of a group of animals that tends to eat these grasses, and possibly hand in hand with that, the evolution of carnivores that eat those ungulates. So there's a whole post-KPG dynamic occurring in the evolution of grassland-based ecosystems. And what we can say for sure is that fossilized grass and increased amount of grass pollens appear in the Miocene, and we seem to have a picture of increasing abundance and diversity of grasses from 25 million years ago through to the day and the establishment of those grass-based ecosystems. So another quite late but really interesting change in life on land. Now that's quite a lot I fitted into this series of videos of the evolution of life on land, but that's because I think it's a really, really interesting evolutionary story. It's one where we can dig down in and get a really kind of good picture of how major transitions in evolution have occurred and how this ecospace has gone from being not empty, but has radically changed from the Ordovician through to today as eukaryotes have gradually colonized the land a bit more. I hope you have found it as interesting as I find it. I hope you've enjoyed the videos. Thank you if you got to this point for watching them all. It's been great to talk to you. And if you have any questions, do get in touch. See you around.